Now, I've looked into the current number one team in FPL this season, and it's not quite as you would expect. Now, you might be thinking the number one team in FPL so far has definitely used some of their chips. Well, you'd be wrong. They haven't used any. Not even their first wildcard. I'm going to take you through the team, their game week history, the transfers they've made to find out just how they've done it. Thought I'd start by having a look at the game week 1 team that Deb had. Leno in goal, a really strong defence, all defenders and goalkeepers returning in game week 1. 5 points the minimum for Saliba and Botman, then Leno with 12, Estupinian with 7. Both Mitoma and Mbeumo were in the team from game week 1. I think most managers either went with just one of them and then spent a little bit more money on the rest of the midfield. Saka and Salah to complement them. We also had Diaby on the bench as well for a 7-pointer. So a really stacked team with what I'd suggest was a bit of a benching headache in that first game week. And to be honest, I actually got the call wrong with Diaby outscoring both Mitoma and Salah. Watkins, Haaland and João Pedro up front. I suggest this team is relatively template, to be honest. Had Gabriel in there as well, I've just noticed, who obviously got benched in game week 1, but whether they had some intel as to whether Gabriel was benched so they started Saliba instead, I don't really know, but it looks like that was the case. 91 points to kick off the season, and you can see there are some key players that have scored well this season that Deb has had from the start. Speaking of those key players, I want to talk about Salah and Mbeumo and Watkins. They've been in Deb's team from game week 1. Salah has obviously torn it up this season, pretty much scoring points every game week, and there have been a few times where he's been captained. And Mbeumo, he's not done quite as well as Salah, but he's only 6.5 million to start the season off. But he's been in the team the whole time and owned for the massive hauls that he's had. 13, 16, 14 pointers across the season. He's done really well and has been in Deb's team from game week 1, as has Ollie Watkins. I think Ollie Watkins has been a bit of the secret here. A lot of managers would have sold him towards the midpoint of the season so far when basically he was only getting assists. Managers might have been put off him a little bit. But Deb has stuck with him throughout. Pretty much returned every game week he's been in her team, and yeah, looked really good. What does that mean for the game week history then? So, well, started off the season in 45k and pretty much had a green arrow the entire season. Lowest scoring game week, you can see it on the right, only 49 points in game week 8, but that was a pretty poor game week for most people. Dropped from 19th overall to 68th, so hardly the biggest red arrow in the world. But yeah, just a fabulous season throughout, really. Been hovering around in the top 100 for the last 4 or 5 game weeks. Game week 5 was 103rd. That's only gotten better now to game week 1 with 1 overall, which is just, yeah, absolutely insane. But you can see there, hovered around the top 100 for the last 5 or so game weeks. So how have they done it then? What transfers have they made to get into that position? Well, Gabriel to Gusto was the first transfer that was used in game week 3. I'd say that was a really smart transfer. I think remembering back to the time, Gabriel definitely wasn't looking nailed in that Arsenal team. Reece James recently picked up an injury for Chelsea. Gusto at 4 million seemed a really sensible transfer in. We saw Sterling pick up a little bit of form come game week 4. So Mitoma was basically sold for Sterling. Interesting because I don't think Deb scored any points other than like the 2 points for a blank from Sterling for the entire time that she owned him. Edouard was an interesting pickup in game week 4 for a couple of mini hauls that a lot of people didn't have him for. This was really the only differential I'd suggest that was actually in this team was Edouard for a couple of hauls. Interestingly bought in Kyle Walker in game week 6. Neto, another really smart transfer as well in game week 6. Edouard made way for Morris in game week 7, obviously the double game week, and actually took a hit in game week 8. Sold Saka for Son and Estupinian for Dan Burn, obviously with the great Newcastle fixtures in mind and the fact that Spurs were looking really good. Saka had that niggling injury. I think both of those moves made sense, and it kind of taught me that taking hits isn't really the end of the world, provided there's justification for it, and particularly if you're taking out injured players. Saliba made way in game week 9 for Pedro Porro, and then Morris has made way again last week in game week 10 for João Pedro. We'll see how that one turns out across the season, but all of those moves at the moment, obviously they're looking solid. It's number 1 in the world, but that's how they've done it. So how did that team look last week then? Well, started Areola over Leno, both scored 3 points, so nothing too much in that. Walker, Pedro Porro and Dan Burn in defence. Didn't really have a whole lot to choose from when you look at that bench, to be completely honest. Mbeumo, Diaby, Salah and Son all in there for 10 points or more, so ridiculous return from that midfield. Watkins, his first blank of the season, although he got the most expected goals of any game week so far. Haaland and João Pedro, the other strikers. What I will say is there's another bit of a benching dilemma here where Pedro Neto outscored João Pedro, but was actually on Debs' bench. So it goes to show really across this season, still made, not mistakes, but could have, have benched basically players that have scored more points than the starting 11, but still ended up in number 1 spot. I thought I'd end this video just with a little summary as to what I've learned by looking at the team throughout the game weeks and what we might be able to pick up from the current number 1's team. So first of all, I'd say don't read too much into this video. I mean, rank at game week 11 doesn't really mean much, although I'd say with Debs not using her wild card yet, it really does look like she's in for a good shout for actually winning the whole thing based on how things are going so far. But yeah, rank at game week 11 obviously doesn't mean anything. The only rank that means something is where you are at the end of the season. What I would say is she's been really patient so far, kept faith with key players that quite a lot of other players in FPL I think would have sold. So Mbumo, Diaby, and I'd say Botman as well. A lot of people avoided Botman at the start of the season, but he fairly scored Debs some points. And Mbumo and Diaby, certainly how Diaby sort of started the season, relatively strong in the first fixture and then kind of dropped off. Same with Mbumo. A lot of managers would have sold them, but Debs has kept faith and that's been duly rewarded. I'd also say I've learned that really not been afraid to take hits when it's been important for their team. Obviously only took a -4, so it's not the biggest hit in the world, but for a couple of injured players to really improve the team, it totally made sense to make the hit. And what I'd say in terms of hits is I wouldn't be put off, provided they're relatively justified and the points potential is clear. It absolutely makes sense. The only real differential that's been in there is Edouard, but even then, the biggest point scorer I think he got was 12. So it's not like they've had a massive differential haul. They've just had really strong players that have scored consistently throughout the season. It's not been a case of, finding that little nugget of a player that can score a haul and then absolutely rocket your rank. There really is no special secret with this team, and I think that's probably the key takeaway for me. It's just picking solid players, returning good points, not really going massively differential, and that's what's led to her being number 1. Alright, and that's the end of the video. Like I said, I'm not taking too much away from this. Rank 1 in game week 11 is obviously great, but it doesn't really mean much come the end of the season if you're way out of it. So yeah, it's just interesting to see how someone has got themselves into that position though, because you can always learn something from these kind of players and see what they've done with their team. And to not have used their wildcard so far, I thought was quite shocking and worth talking about. So if you enjoyed the video, please leave me a like rating. If you want to know a bit more info about her team as well, let me know in the comments and I'll try and get it for you. And yeah, subscribe to the Golden Goal channel, which should be just there if you want to see more content from me in the future.